about overnight stay, does it therefore mean that when a child goes to stay over at the auntie's house for sleepover, auntie, I want to stay in your house for holiday, is that alternative care? No. The provision therefore says that it does not include, sorry, I think we can move on to the next slide. The provision therefore, by reason of that definition, and that definition as well, you can also see it in the recent study by the African Committee on Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child's Working Group on Children Without Parental Care. That was also released. The study was released recently as well, and you see such a definition in that same study. And now it therefore means that it does not include children staying overnight with family or friends as part of holiday or visit. Likewise, and interestingly, it does not also include adoption. And why? First of all, when you read the UN Convention, you see when it explains alternative care, it goes on to give examples. It will mention kafala, mention adoption, but then in the guidelines, I would say it somewhat goes on to correct itself, because if we understand adoption, we know that once an adoption order is done, it is deemed as if that child was born from the womb of the parents. So you cannot now term it alternative care. Rather, you refer to that child as though the child was born by the parents. And that's why it's not categorized under that as well. Then thirdly, you can also refer to it in terms of children deprived of liberty due to alleged or recognized infringement of the law. So we're talking about remand home, approved schools, and approved schools now within our context here as well. And then Bostal being, from the framework of the Children and Young Persons law as well, anyways. And then, however, it includes kinship care. Now, kinship care is sounding like one big. Kinship care is what a lot of us Africans have actually we've been doing it without even knowing. Kinship care, that child that goes to live with their uncle when their mom passes, or that child that is living with their grandma because of circumstances, or that child that is living with their uncle's best friend. Maybe the man, his best friend has passed the accident or so. I say, no, your child, I cannot be alive and watch that your child is in this situation. We see kinship care in terms of family and close friends. Then we also see foster care as well, which is permanent, temporary placement in family environments. We also see other forms of family-based or family-like care placements, which also are referred. So we see that alternative care is a broader terminology encompassing or comprising of these various forms of care for children. And in that, we also see residential care and others as well. In fact, when it comes to residential care, you can somewhat almost categorize now. Are we looking at in a family-like form, which is what we are being encouraged even for people that are still running these homes? Or are we looking at an institutional form? They differ. An example that's often called when you talk about family-like is SOS Children's Village, where they do like a smaller grouping of children and then a mother, in quotes, a house mother. So with that, you have smaller groupings and somebody to particularly take care of them, as opposed to maybe 20, 30 children. We'll talk a bit more on that. And then, now, when it comes to our provisions, community homes, voluntary homes, children's homes. And if anybody has read those sections, you'll be like, what are they saying? Like, what are the differences? And it's almost like it's like wool or something. You're trying to detangle and find the root and differentiate. And the way to help in truly being able to say, okay, this is where this one ends, this is where this one starts, this is where this one ends, is to truly look at the origin. Now, these terminologies are not necessarily akin or not necessarily born from our own local context. You know, it is actually somewhat of an adoption or a borrowing from the United Kingdom's usage. You know, and with that, their legal provisions had to make provisions to cater for those existing structures like voluntary homes and community homes. Likewise, to also introduce the terminology children home as well. And in fact, if you read the Child Rights Act, the Children's Act 1989, you will see an almost verbatim adoption of those provisions into our own law, when necessarily they didn't so much as exist as those terms. In fact, Africa has been very much family oriented. If we look, you know, Africa has been very much family oriented. So if our law were to truly reflect where we are coming from, it would have started from that. But we see that borrowing at this point. And now going on to the definition which we use, and even they are also transitioning those two as well, especially if you look at the Care Standards Act of the UK. You see that a children's home that is subject to, you know, regulations by the commissioner, you say a home is a children's home if it provides or usually provides or is intended to provide care and accommodation wholly or mainly for more than 3 children at any one time. So that's a clear definition for us to also work with. And then going on now from that, just to highlight a few general legal principles. The first is validity. The question now is, the section 196 sub 1 of the Rivers State Child Rights Law 2000 says, no child should be cared for or provided with accommodation in a children's home unless the home is registered under this part of the law. And I'm sure we'll hear that as well in, you know, with our other speakers. You know, it is important that we register. It is important you go to the ministry and you register. I'm sure Mrs. Fumi will come up to tell us even more on that. And we also see that it is actually even an imprisonable offense to run an unregistered home. So it is important. You don't want to, in a bid to do good, spend time, become ex-convict. You don't want that, okay? And it's also, you know, there is a fine, there's the option of fine, and then it could be that the court will award both for you. So, and then going on, it is also important as well when we talk about validity. Once you've registered as well, we're talking about adherence. After that initial process, are you also adhering to what they have laid down, what the state has laid down? Are you adhering to it? Are you confirming? Because there will be periodic inspections as provided by the law. And in addition as well, there will be regulations. So are you also aware and complying with that? And then going on to best interest principle, which we talked about earlier on. And I'm sure we've heard it, and if you've not heard it, you will hear it today. So, it says in section 1 of the Rivers State Child Rights Law 2022, we see that as well in across board UN treaty, regional documents, both within Africa and beyond, even states as well, other state parties. It says that in every action, this is now the Rivers State Child Rights Law of 2022, in every action concerning the child, whether undertaken by an individual, public or private body, institution or service, court of law, or administrative or legislative authority, the best interest of the child shall be the primary consideration. And what does this mean? it takes us somewhat back to the initial definition, to the initial slide. Now, our coming to terms of what best interest means is not just on how we think, what our culture says, what we have been doing in the past, but it is founded on what the law says. So you cannot interpret best interest principle outside of what the law says. The law is the guide for what you would then consider, or is the foundation for what you would then consider is best interest. So your arrival at what best interest is for a matter cannot therefore be an illegality. Simple example, you say, so simple example, you say, oh, this child, let me give out this child to somebody for, in quotes, adoption. This, and I put in quote because you saying that, not going through, this is for my scenario, not going through the particular route, it is an illegality. And you, maybe in your mind, you'll say, it's a win-win now. The child is going to a home. Then we too, we also get, our own cut for what we've spent on. No. It is an illegality. And through that course, that process, you are also not upholding the best interest of the child. A lot of things and a lot of stages you have excluded from that process by trying to boycott will harm the well-being, harm the life, harm the system that protects children. So it's important for us to know that best interest must be interpreted on the foundation of legality. And going on now to legal, in quotes as well, child's rights standards, because we are looking at children in this circumstance. The law makes provisions for several rights of the child. We are talking about non-discrimination. So this framework helps us to, from time to time, assess our work. Assess our work. Okay, what are we doing right at this point? Are our actions hampering on any of the rights of the child? We are talking about, let's say, non-discrimination. The way I'm placing this child, is there any form, or is there any, am I in some way directly or indirectly exposing the child to be discriminated? Are there circumstances in that wise? Section 10 makes provision. So the sections you see there are in terms of the child's rights law of River State, since we are talking about River State. And these provisions, they don't simply work in isolation. They don't simply work in isolation. We see that they work hand in hand. For instance, non-discrimination, it can be paired with inherent dignity. Inherent dignity as well can be paired with others, name and identity. You see that they intertwine. It's just like cases. You don't just say, oh, this is the sole way. When you look at the study, just as we have case management in law and other, we also have case management in social work. That's why it's important for us to identify. So we also have that the child has the right to private and family life. It's important for us to identify this. And that's why also, when you talk about alternative care, you begin to consider, in view of these rights of the child, how can we then provide the best solution in this circumstance for the child? Does the circumstance immediately warrant us taking that child to the children's home? Does the circumstance warrant that child coming in, or is it that there are other solutions, family-based solutions? Is it a situation where the child, though the mother is not around, can live with an extended, or is it a situation where, the family is actually suffering from hardship?